Today, we're going to tackle an ancient disease that's still a major challenge in the modern world, Hansen's disease, or as you might know it, leprosy. And we're going to unpack it all by zeroing in on a single, really tough medical exam question from back in 2006. Believe it or not, this one question is the perfect key to unlock everything from clinical myths to public health policy. All right, let's get into it. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll face the medical challenge itself. Then I'll reveal the correct answer. After that, and this is my favorite part, we're going to use the wrong answers to bust some major clinical myths. Then we'll do a quick rundown of the essentials of the disease, and we'll wrap up with the most important takeaways and some pretty cool Nobel Prize connections you might not expect. Okay, let's not waste any time. I want you to imagine you're sitting for your boards, it's 2006, and this question pops up on the screen. Take a good look. How would you tackle this? Okay, let's chew on these options for a second. Option A, that's a deep-cut immunology question. B pulls us out of the clinic and into public health law. And then C and D, well, they're all about high-stakes treatment decisions. You can see how each one is a potential trap. Got your answer picked out? All right, let's see if you nailed it. Now, the correct answer here might actually surprise you. It's not about a specific drug or a complex lab result. Nope, it's about something much broader, public health and the law. And there it is. The correct answer is B. Like American tegumentary leishmaniasis, Hansen's disease is also a compulsorily notifiable disease. So you might be wondering, why is this simple administrative fact the right answer over all those other clinical details? Well, it all boils down to this critical concept, compulsory notification. In plain English, this means that if a health professional even suspects a case, they are legally required to report it. It's not optional. This is the absolute bedrock for how public health systems get a grip on diseases that can cause major disability and have a huge impact on society. And this isn't just theory, it has massive real-world impact. In a place like Brazil, where Hansen's is endemic, this is law. The moment a case gets logged into their system, it sets off a whole chain reaction. The authorities can track outbreaks, the patient is guaranteed free treatment, and, this is so important, they can find and check close contacts to stop the disease from spreading. This single policy is one of the most powerful weapons we have against leprosy. Now, for the really fun part. The genius of this question is what we can learn from the answers that were wrong. Each one is a trap that highlights a common misconception about Hansen's disease. Let's start taking them apart. So let's look at option A. It tries to connect a very specific immune reaction, erythema nodosum leprosum, with a diagnostic test, the Mitsuda test. It sounds technical and it sounds plausible, but it's actually completely backward. Here's the deal. The Mitsuda test is pretty straightforward. It checks how strong a patient's cellular immunity is. A positive test means you have good immunity. A negative test means you have poor immunity. Simple enough? But here's the twist. That intense inflammatory reaction, erythema nodosum, really only happens in patients with a Virchow-Wadian form of leprosy, which is the form that is defined by having poor cellular immunity. So by definition, their Mitsuda test has to be negative. And if you ever need to remember that on an exam, here's a fantastic little trick. Just think V for Virchowian is V for vazio, which is Portuguese for empty. Empty of cellular immunity. That means a negative Mitsuda test. It's a perfect way to lock that concept in. Okay, moving on to our second myth, option C. This is a classic trap. It suggests that prednisone, a powerful steroid, is the one-size-fits-all solution for the two major inflammatory reactions in Hansen's disease. And that is a really dangerous oversimplification. In the real world, the treatment is way more specific. Yes, prednisone is absolutely the go-to drug for type 1 reactions, also called reversal reactions, but for type 2 reactions, that same erythema nodosum we were just talking about, the first-line drug of choice is actually thalidomide. You'd only really use a steroid like prednisone if thalidomide isn't an option, like for women who could become pregnant or if there's very severe nerve damage. One size definitely does not fit all. And that brings us to our final myth, option D. Now this one is about a really serious scenario. What do you do when a patient has both Hansen's disease and tuberculosis? The option suggests you can just stick to the standard leprosy treatment. And that is absolutely dangerously wrong. Here's why. The standard Hansen's treatment uses an antibiotic called rifampicin, but only once a month. To treat active TB, you need rifampicin every single day. If you give a TB patient a monthly dose, you're not just failing to treat the TB, you're actively encouraging the bacteria to develop drug resistance. The rule is simple and non-negotiable. The TB protocol always wins, period. So now that we've busted all those myths, let's just zoom out for a second and put everything back into context. What is this disease really? At its heart, Hansen's is a chronic infection caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium leprae. And this little bug is unique. It has a weird preference for the cooler parts of the human body. That's why it loves to hang out in the skin and the peripheral nerves, which of course leads to all of its most famous and devastating symptoms. You know, diagnosing this is less about fancy machines and more about good old-fashioned clinical detective work. It usually starts with just a suspicion, a patch of skin that looks a little off. But the absolute key, the thing you have to do, is test for sensation in that patch. You get your confirmation if you find one of three main signs: a definite loss of feeling, a nerve that feels thick to the touch, or a skin smear that shows the bacteria under a microscope. This table really just says it all, doesn't it? Look at all these other conditions that can cause skin patches: vitiligo, pityriasis, even lupus. They all cause lesions, sure, but only Hansen's disease causes that signature loss of sensation. That is the clinical smoking gun that separates it from pretty much everything else. We have covered a ton of ground here, so let's bring it all home and boil it down to the absolute must-know facts, and then we'll look at the incredible scientific history behind all this. Okay, so if you take nothing else away from this, remember these points. 1. It's a notifiable disease. That's a public health priority. 2. The Mitsuda test is negative in the patients who get type 2 reactions. 3. Know your treatments: thalidomide for type 2, prednisone for type 1. 4. Never ever forget to switch to a daily rifampicin schedule if TB is in the picture. And the bottom line for everything is that early diagnosis is the only shot we have to prevent the permanent, life-changing disabilities this disease can cause. And you know, this fight has been going on for a long, long time. Way back in 1873, Gerhard Hansen made history when he identified the bacteria. It was the first time anyone had proven that a microbe could cause a chronic disease in humans. That discovery literally paved the way for giants like Robert Koch, who won a Nobel for his work on the related TB bacteria. And that fight continues today, highlighted by 2UU's 2015 Nobel for her work on malaria, another one of these so-called neglected diseases that mostly affect the poorest people in the world. Which really just leaves us with one final big question. We've come so far from thinking this was some kind of curse, to understanding the bacteria, to having effective drug cocktails, and yet the disease is still with us. So the question for our future is, what's the next great leap going to be? A vaccine? A rapid diagnostic test? What's the Nobel-worthy breakthrough that will finally, once and for all, put this ancient disease into the history books where it belongs?